Today, one of the most successful writers in British history died. He wrote many novels, but all were dwarfed by one of the characters he created. John Stapleton now reports from a flat in central London.
Yes, Frank, I'm sitting in the study of one of the most famous Englishmen ever. But who is it? Well, we've got some clues for you. Clue number one is this violin. It's a good one too, a Stradivarius. Perhaps our host uses it to while away those long gaslit evenings. Then there's the pipe, still smouldering in the ashtray. And next to that, this, his trusty service revolver. Well, he's obviously a man who likes a spot of target practice, or is he after bigger game? And last of all, there's this, the extra-large magnifying glass. Ideal, you might say, for examining 5 orange pips or the footprints of a gigantic hound. Well, to the thousands of his fans, this must all seem rather elementary. But for those of you still in the dark, the address is 221B, Baker Street, and our host's name is Sherlock Holmes, the greatest detective of them all. And though it's almost a century since Holmes tracked down the Hound of the Baskervilles and wrestled with Moriarty above the Reichenbach Falls, today is the 50th anniversary of the death of his creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And tonight, with archive films never seen before on British television, we look at the strange life of the man who, for many, not only invented, but really was Sherlock Holmes.
Well, eh? Good old boy, then. Let's see now, I've got to speak 1 or 2 words, just to try my voice, I understand.
Shortly before his death in 1930, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle mused over his 70 years and 10 and sketched a self-portrait. He was a tired but intrepid old workhorse, dragging behind him enough achievements, adventures and struggles to fill several lives. Just one of those achievements, the creation of a character called Sherlock Holmes, was enough to secure Sir Arthur his place in posterity. But the world seldom remembers there was so much more to the man. He was born into Queen Victoria's world, the 5 continents of which were largely dominated by London, the very heart of global intrigue. Often described as the great Englishman, Doyle was in fact descended from a line of Irish Catholic gentry, but born and raised in Scotland. While at Stonyhurst, the stern Jesuit school in Lancashire, he excelled at sport, as he would throughout his life. Much later, he'd play cricket for the MCC at Lord's. He studied medicine at Edinburgh University, where, to the alarm of his family, he proclaimed himself an agnostic. As a holiday job, his first taste of adventure was as ship's doctor and crewman aboard a whaler bound for the Arctic Ocean. On the first night, he gained the crew's respect by blacking the steward's eye. He wrote,
"I never knew what it was before to be thoroughly healthy. I feel as if I could go anywhere and do anything."
There was to be another voyage a year later as a fully qualified doctor. This time, a nightmare journey aboard a cargo and passenger liner to the African coast. He wrote to his mother about it.
"Dear Mom, I've turned up all safe after having had the African fever, been nearly eaten by a shark, and as a finale, the ship catching fire between Madeira and London."
In 1882, he settled down to a sleepy little doctor's practice in Southsea. He married Louise Hawkins, nicknamed Tui. The people of Southsea he found to be alarmingly healthy, so he wrote stories to while away the hours. One of them was eventually accepted by a major magazine, and so Doyle felt encouraged to write more.
I was quite a young doctor at the time. I'd had, of course, a scientific training, and I used occasionally to read detective stories. It always annoyed me how in the old-fashioned detective story, the detective always seemed to get at his results either by some sort of lucky chance or a fluke, or else it was quite unexplained how he got there. He got there, but he never gave an explanation how. Well, that didn't seem to me quite playing the game. It seemed to me that he's bound to give his reasons why he came to his conclusions.
The result of a great deal of thought and these notes was A Study in Scarlet. It was turned down by half a dozen publishers before surfacing in the 1886 Christmas edition of Beaton's magazine. The detective hero of this and successive stories was that master of deductive reasoning, Sherlock Holmes. Robert Louis Stevenson wrote from Samoa in praise of the consulting detective.
Only one thing troubles me. Can this be my old friend Joe Bell?
I used, as a student, to have an old professor, his name was Bell, who was extraordinarily quick at deductive work. He would look at the patient, he would hardly allow the patient to open his mouth, but he would make his diagnosis of the disease and also very often of the patient's nationality and occupation and other points entirely by his power of observation. So naturally I thought to myself, well, if a scientific man like Bell was to come into the detective business, he wouldn't do these things by chance. He'd get the thing by building it up scientifically.
My father's old professor, Dr. Bell, was certainly the model on which the methods of Sherlock Holmes are based. The methods of observation and deduction began and ended there. The personality of Holmes and the way of putting those methods into practice in real-life crime did not belong to Bell at all. It belonged to my father. And Bell himself was one of the first to see that, because he wrote to my father and said, "If you are yourself Sherlock Holmes, and well you know it."
If Doyle was the brilliant and antisocial Sherlock Holmes, then he was also the rather bumbling but gregarious Dr. Watson. Perhaps together they make up the contradictory character of Doyle himself.
At first I think they attracted very little attention, but after time, when I began the short adventures, one after the other, coming out month after month in the Strand magazine, people began to recognize that it was different to the old detective, that there was something there which was new. They began to buy the magazine, and it prospered, and so I may say did I. We both came along together, and from that time Sherlock Holmes fairly took root. I've written a good deal more about him than I ever intended to do, but my hand has been rather forced by kind friends who continually wanted to know more. And so it is that this monstrous growth has come out of what was really a comparatively small seed.
The monstrous growth haunted Doyle all his life. He wanted his historical novels to receive the universal acclaim that Sherlock Holmes enjoyed. There was but one solution. He would assassinate the detective. And who more qualified to do the job than Holmes's evil arch-enemy and intellectual equal, Professor Moriarty. Locked in deadly combat, they both disappeared over the precipice at the Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland. George Bernard Shaw offered an epitaph for the detective.
Holmes was a drug addict without a single amiable trait.
The world did not agree. Everywhere, people clamored for more Sherlock Holmes adventures. And so, after making a posthumous appearance in The Hound of the Baskervilles, his author accepted an American offer of £500 per story to officially revive him. Holmes and the cinema are about the same age, and filmmakers, not surprisingly, were quick to cash in on him. This is the very first screen Holmes, filmed in America in the year 1900. It's more of a spoof than a story, but the unidentified actor was the first of many to don the deerstalker. The idea of killing off Holmes had occurred to Doyle in Switzerland. In 1893, Tui, his wife, was diagnosed as a consumptive. He took her to the mountains for the air. It was the first of several visits there during Tui's 10-year battle against her illness. Doyle took up a then obscure form of alpine transport. Early one winter morning, he and two local brothers set off to cross the 9,000-foot Fura Pass. Doyle and his two friends were the first ever to cover the tortuous 12 miles in midwinter. Today, the Swiss officially acknowledge that it was Conan Doyle who first introduced skiing as a sport to their country. In the next few years, Doyle kept traveling to America on the first of several lecture tours there, to Egypt on a holiday crowded with dangerous adventures, and to South Africa as a volunteer senior physician in the Boer War. The successful and comfortable writer didn't have to risk his life at the front and in the disease-infested hospitals, but his doctor's concern and journalist's curiosity always drove him to the center of things. He was also fascinated by all matters military. Throughout his life, he would write about improvements that could be made to the forces, their strategy and weapons. Of the Boer War, he would write an epic history as well as a best-selling defense of British conduct in it, and he would give the proceeds to charity. With the passing of Queen Victoria, a new age began, a century of superpowers slipping helplessly towards mechanized barbarism. The gallant, chivalrous world of Doyle's historical novels would finally expire in the mud of the Somme. But in the brief Edwardian sunlight, the author was knighted at the age of 43. There were new triumphs. He created a new character, Professor Challenger. Once again, he astounded his readers, this time with a lost world recreated in this early movie version. A world suspended in time where dinosaurs still roamed. There was tragedy too. Sir Arthur's wife Tui at last succumbed to her illness. But there were new challenges. In the name of justice, Sir Arthur applied the techniques of Sherlock Holmes in 2 real-life criminal cases with astounding success. As a direct result of one of the cases, a court of criminal appeal was introduced into the English legal system, one of many Doyle ideas to become fact. There was a new romance. Sir Arthur married again. He had secretly admired the beautiful Jean Lecky for several years. She shared her husband's growing interest in psychic matters. It was to culminate after the First World War in their profound belief in spiritualism.
Gradually, I became more and more convinced on the matter as I studied year in, year out. But it was only in the time of the war, when all these splendid young fellows were disappearing from our view, the whole world was saying, well, what's become of them? Where are they? What are they doing now? Have they dissipated into nothing? Or are they still the grand fellows that we used to know?
Sir Arthur toured the battlefronts. He saw the carnage at first hand. And just before Armistice Day, the war claimed his eldest son, Kingsley.
He spent the rest of his life going all over the world, lecturing all over the world, in all the great cities, telling people, yes, they are still alive, and it is possible to communicate, and it is possible to get absolute proof.
And talking about things that I've handled, that I've seen, that I've heard with my own ears. And I always, mind you, in the presence of witnesses. I never risk hallucination.
Eric Weiss, Harry Houdini to his audience, had searched in vain for proof. Longing to contact his beloved mother, his interest in spiritualism had rapidly turned to disbelief when his magician's cunning had penetrated the hokum and fakery of seance after seance. Sir Arthur was spellbound by Houdini's great feats of escapology and was convinced they were achieved by spiritual means, no matter how often Houdini passionately refuted this. Nonetheless, a great friendship evolved between them, Houdini basking in the great writer's company, and Sir Arthur looking upon Houdini as some kind of supernatural being. Later, Houdini was to deny that Sir Arthur and his wife had contacted his mother for him, stating that Sir Arthur was surprisingly gullible in certain matters. But there were many things which Houdini would not deny. It didn't take a magician to recognize a great man.
Goodbye. Come along.
Hugh Scully looking back on the life of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who died 50 years ago today.